There's many aspects of aviation that really thrill me. I've flown in these little itty-bitty open cockpit biplanes, and I've flown in high-performance acrobatic airplanes.
Rolling to the left at the same time.
I first got interested in aviation when I was working for CNN as a correspondent, and I covered the crash of a 747 that blew up shortly after taking off from New York's JFK airport. And then I wound up writing a book about it. So the process of writing Deadly Departure got me very, very interested in the subject of aviation safety. It's not as simple as putting two pieces of metal together and saying, aha, this is what happened. My new book, The Crash Detectives, is an examination of probably the most intriguing air mystery in the century of commercial flight, that is the disappearance of Malaysia 370. I got involved with the disappearance of Malaysia 370 because I had done some work for ABC News.
Christine Negroni, an aviation safety expert, said
they had asked me to come on out to Kuala Lumpur and give them a hand. I helped the network take a look at the information that was coming out. Did it make sense? Was the information that was being given knowable? The fact is, millions of people get on an airplane every day. They land at their destination completely uneventfully. And that's right, that's as it should be. When you write a lot about air accidents, people tend to think you're a bit of a disaster queen. I love so many things about aviation that have nothing to do with airplane crashes. I like the history of it, I like the poetry of it, I like the magic. Several times, I've been flying and I've looked out the window and I've seen what's called a pilot's halo. If you can look out the window and see a rainbow around your plane, this is the poetry of flying. Covering aviation allows me to travel the world. So I've had the opportunity to see a lot of places. Aviation and travel makes the world smaller. On the other hand, when you get to your destination and you see the Cambodian monk or the Indian classical dancer, you realize the world is huge. We're so alike and we're so different, and travel lets you recognize that great, fantastic ambiguity of humanity. The fact that we can travel, the fact that we can get in an airplane and be somewhere else, somewhere wonderful, love that, own that. That's a fantastic thing.
Hello and welcome to American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan. Our guest today is Christine Negroni, a journalist, a best-selling author, an aviation safety specialist, blogger, and former network correspondent for CBS and CNN. Thank you so much for joining us, Christine.
I'm delighted to be here, Saida, and that is no overstatement.
Thank you. Well, we want to, of course, talk about your books. This is American Stories, after all. But we would be remiss if we didn't take a few moments to get your take on what has been happening in the aviation industry as of 2024. It seems like every day there is something in the news, and some of it is quite disturbing. So for our viewers who are concerned about that, what would you say?
Well, I think that it's a strange time in aviation, and I've been covering aviation for 25 years. It's a strange time, and that's largely due, I think, to two issues. The digitization of aircraft, which is kind of a hit your head into the wall subject and kind of dense and not all that interesting, but it's a real issue. We can get to it in a minute. But larger, I think, is the competition between Airbus and Boeing has turned the industry upside down. Airbus was always the scrappy upstart to Boeing, and it is no longer. And I think it's led Boeing, there's only two producers of large aircraft in the world, and they are Airbus and Boeing. And it's led Boeing to make some cost cutting and speedy decisions that have not turned out to be in the best interest of aviation safety. And that, I think, is what we're seeing of late in the past 5 years and definitely in the beginning of 2024.
And again, it's all about money as far as from what you can see.
I'd say, and I'm no business specialist, but I would say that the way the world is turning, and certainly the way American business is turning, a bottom line has become the top line. And, a lot of decisions are being made in terms of cost cutting. Entire books have been written about this new form of business in which shareholders are the only interests of big companies, and the consequences of that. Certainly in Boeing's case, the decision to produce the 737 MAX, which I hardly need to say is a flawed aircraft and responsible for two fatal crashes and a third near disaster, was the result of a decision that Boeing made to try and get a lead on a competitor, and was made with the how much money it would cost calculation front of mind, and that the consequences of that have not been good.
Now, there's been a word recently that there is an investigation in the works into Boeing. What's your reaction, or what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting you should ask about that investigation, because just like after the first two MAX crashes, the one in the fall of 2018 and then the following spring 2019, there were many, many investigations launched. There was a criminal investigation. There was two congressional investigations. There was a General Accounting Office investigation, and there were industry, FAA, and industry expert panels that came up, and that started to look at how airplanes were certified and what was the role of the regulator and versus the manufacturer, and who had the upper hand, and blah blah blah. So a lot of investigations came out of those two fatal crashes, and then the end result of that really was everybody, interest died down. Everybody went back to the way things were, and the criminal investigation into Boeing ended with a very strange, very unusual finding that they misbehaved, but they weren't going to misbehave anymore. And these federal charges, which were really, linked to the deaths of hundreds of people, would be set aside, and Boeing would no longer have to face these charges if it behaved for 2 years. Now, what happened with that is, there was a lot of outcry, as you can well imagine, especially among the families. But the 2 years ran out, and the 2 years ran out a day or two after this most recent event in Portland, in which the door plug of a 737 MAX blew out, and so a number of people on board came close to dying. They did not. That airplane landed safely, but trust me, they had the ride of their lives, and not in a good way. And so, as a consequence of this happening, while Boeing was still under this 2 year window of behave yourself, and it could be three. I may be getting that number wrong, so just double check me on that. But whatever, they had this multi-year window. Because it happened just under the deadline, the lawyers representing the families went back and said to the federal prosecutors, "Hey, they're not in compliance, and if they're not in compliance, then this promise that the prosecution would be dropped has to be reevaluated." Now, they had a good argument even then, but since then, a couple of things have come out. One is that the problem with that door plug that made it fly out in the middle of a flight in the beginning of January was initiated in Boeing's factory by Boeing engineers, Boeing mechanics. So when you look at, who's responsible for that, it goes right back to Boeing. That's problem number one. And problem number two is that in the process of the investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board investigation, which is charged with finding out what the heck happened, the National Transportation Safety Board is saying two things. They're saying they're not being forthcoming with us. And number two, Boeing's response is, well, we don't have the documents to show exactly how that door plug was reinstalled incorrectly. What? They don't have the documents? In aviation, you don't have a mechanic go to the bathroom without some sort of somebody signing off on it. So that's a crazy statement to say. So when we talk about the investigation, sorry, this is a long answer, but when you talk about the investigations, you have to go back and take a look at not just the investigations launched now, but all of the investigations that started back in 2018 and 2019 that were supposed to be putting this manufacturer back on track. And it does not appear that they had that effect.
Thank you for sharing that with us. What did you learn from writing your books, Crash Detectives and Deadly Departure, a few years prior to that? What did you learn from the research that you did there? How does it translate to what you are looking at today and what we see today and what your understanding of the issues are today?
It's a good question, and I want to answer it from a high altitude because obviously there's lots of small facts and small details when you take a look at many aviation accidents and near accidents over the course of decades. But the high altitude answer to that question is I learned that accidents and the way we investigate accidents around the world have a really noble goal, and that is to make things safer. So the investigators of whatever, a sultanate, a monarchy, a democracy, it doesn't really matter what the government is. When a government signs on to investigate air accidents using the international standards, the government is saying, we want to know what happened in these accidents so that we can learn from them, so that we don't make the same mistakes again. And that's, to me, like, it's practically holy that we say we can turn catastrophe into success. That's the goal. So when you say, what have I learned over the years? I'd say I learned that lesson. And that in order to get to that place where investigations illuminate us, we have to learn a bunch of other things too. And that bunch of other things is this: we don't punish people for making mistakes. We don't demonize one mistake, and nothing is the result of one mistake. And that aviation is so safe because the protections that have come about over the years of investigating accidents, this safety net, is so robust. But no matter how robust it is, there's always room for improvement. And then the last thing, because to me, this is the most fascinating part and would have been my book, The Crash Detectives, had Malaysia 370 not disappeared. My second book that I was planning to write was this: what people learn from investigating air crash accidents is essentially, how do we make people perform better? The mechanics, the pilots, the air traffic controllers, the system operators, the dispatchers, how do we make them perform better? Because at the end of the day, the airplane is a fairly robust machine. Things don't go wrong on airplanes the way they used to 50 and 100 years ago. Now, when there's an accident, 9 times out of 10, a person or the action of a person is going to be the initiating event or a link in the chain. So if we can make people perform so much better that we have gotten to a place in safety where your chance of dying in an airplane is apparently something like 200 million flights, to one. If we have gotten that safe, then aviation has a secret. How do we perform better in everything else we do? As journalists, as you and I are, as parents, as you and I are, as drivers, as whatever. How can we all perform better? Because the answers are in aviation. That to me is like the best lesson of all.
I have not heard that before, so thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about your book, the Crash Detectives. Tell us what it is about. What is it about?
Well, having said that, what it was supposed to be, I guess I need to explain what it is. I had this idea that we could apply the lessons of aviation to the rest of human performance. And I was working on it very furiously with my then agent, Anna Sproul Latimer, who's a genius as far as I'm concerned. And she said, and we were working on it and getting it ready to go. And I got a call from ABC News because I work as their safety specialist for ABC when they need someone to come in and take a look at their aviation safety coverage. And so ABC News called me and they said, can you get yourself to Malaysia? And I said, yeah. It turned out I was in Vietnam at the time, so it wasn't that far away. And I wound up being there on the scene. I don't know, fact checker, idea generator, talking head, whatever they needed for about 6 weeks. I was there for quite a long time, maybe longer. And as a consequence of that, I came up with a theory about what I think happened to that airplane. And that theory, which has never been disputed by anyone who has knowledge about aviation safety, some people think it was something else, but no one has said it could not have happened the way I described it. But that theory became the sort of the core of my book. So my book that was going to be called Flying Lessons became The Crash Detectives, and I put forward the scenario of what happened to Malaysia 370. It's backed up with previous similar events. It's backed up with things we know happened to either that airplane or other similar airplanes that could have created this chain of events. And then it moves on from Malaysia 370 to talk about other mysterious air accidents and other ways in which humans fail to perform as expected, or other ways that humans performed so much better than expected, and they were able to save the day. So it's really it's a book about a particular disaster, and then it grows into other disasters and what we've learned from them or not, and the ways they have been investigated well or not, and how the human, and this is really the guiding principle throughout the book, how the human is the essential element in everything we do in aviation safety.
Have you gotten any response from some of the industry folks after? I'm sure they are aware of your book, and have you seen any indication that they are taking heed and will follow some of the not that you've made any recommendations, but certainly they are aware of what your findings are?
Well, I'd say when the book was proofread by Chesley Sullenberger, that's Captain Sully, who said the book was an accurate portrayal of the role of human performance in aviation safety, and that I got it.
Penguin Random House Audio presents The Crash Detectives. This is the author, Christine Negroni. The Crash Detectives is about the most intriguing mysteries in aviation history, and of course, Malaysia 370. A lot of strange and inexplicable things happen in air accidents. History does repeat itself, and I really found that when I looked back at these aviation mysteries.
Got it. So yeah, I'd say some people very knowledgeable in aviation have championed the book. It was a Wall Street Journal must read. It's gotten a lot of good reviews, yes, but to my points that perhaps the Australian investigators, the Malaysian investigators, and even the Chinese who have a role in this, and the Americans, because both Americans and Chinese were on board the airplane, to my suggestions that that they spend less time worrying about where the airplane is and more time re-looking at the evidence that's right there on the ground in Malaysia. No, I don't think I've gotten a lot of what I think is appropriate response to my recommendations, that we stop worrying about an airplane that's difficult to find and start doing the kind of investigation that would be done if people were serious about getting to the root of what happened on that airplane. There's been a lot of, look, every airplane, here's the interesting fact. I mean, one of the things I didn't say when you earlier asked me what have I learned is this: airplane accidents are high pressure political events. And so investigators and politicians do what they're being squeezed to do by the general public. And in this case, there was a lot of pressure to do something to find the airplane. And the investigators in Malaysia, who do not appear to have been handling the event very well, thought, okay, fine, let's go out and find this airplane. And they spent millions and millions of dollars, and God knows how much expertise on doing that, and not very much on looking at information they have right there in Malaysia. And I still think that's the case, because nobody cares. The general public isn't saying, let's go back and take a look at that, examination of the last 7 repair records of that airplane or whatever. I'm just making stuff up. But, the general public doesn't pressure for more science. The general public pressures for, like, let's send out a ship and go looking for it, because that's easy to get your head around. It's a lot of pocket protector wearing, folks whose work is not lauded because it's very dense. That's the reality of that.
So as we say in the business, the story continues on that.
The
Right.
story continues. Yes, it does.
Tell us about your other book, Deadly Departures. Departures, correct? Or Departure?
Deadly departure refers to the deadly departure of TWA Flight 800, which many of your viewers aren't going to even remember it because they weren't alive, right? Saida, you and I have been around the block a few times, but back in 1996, not that many times, but a few. Um, Back in 1996, a 747 took off from JFK Airport headed to Paris, and at 13,000 feet, it exploded, and everyone on board died. And that, at the time, this was pre 9/11. At the time, that airplane accident was huge, huge news. And no one could figure out exactly what made the airplane blow up, except for the NTSB, which fairly early on thought that there had been an explosion in the center wing tank. But, rumors and a lot of conspiracy theories, the Navy shut it down, the Iranians shut it down, there was a bomb on board. There was a lot of that. And there was an FBI official who's now deceased, but at the time he was very wrapped around that as well, the idea that this was a criminal act. And so there was a lot of investigation into what it wasn't, and not enough investigation into what it was. Went on for 4 years, but ultimately it was determined that the airplane failed. The fuel tank exploded due to a design flaw on that particular airplane, on that particular model of airplane, the 747, and almost every other airplane produced by Boeing that begins with a 7. So that's a lot of aircraft. At the time, it was 8,000 aircraft that also might harbor this same design flaw, which very simply was there was a heating element located underneath the center tank. And when there wasn't enough fuel in the center tank, that heating element could take the fuel and turn it into it, make it raise the temperature of that fuel or the fumes of that fuel so high that it could self-ignite. And so this actually turned out to be an investigation into what could be a very serious problem. And the FAA or the NTSB made recommendations that that design be changed. And over the years, it was, it took more than 10 years to get it changed. And now, of course, the new model aircraft don't have that same problem. But it was sort of a big eye-opening story. And because of all the fuss and muss over whether it was a bomb or a missile, I think the air safety part of it was kind of overlooked by the general public. Today, people don't know what TWA 800 is anymore, but at the time, it was a big deal.
Well, let's hope that there's more attention to the books that you've written, because there's so much knowledge to be taken away from your book. So thank you. And then you have a third book, and that one is on a slightly lighter note. So tell us the title of that book and
well, I'm working on two books. One is not on a lighter note, and that is my next book. It's called Unmasking Boeing, and this will take a look at the decisions that Boeing airplane manufacturing has been making over the past 50 years, and how those decisions have many times been wrong, in some cases criminal. And how that, this legacy of Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, as being sort of the company by which all other standards should be judged, may not be appropriate. So that book, Unmasking Boeing, I'm in the process of working on now. And then I figure at some point in my life, I'd like to retire. So before I do that, I want to tell some of the unusual stories that really, I'm not making this up, the funny stories, the odd characters and crazy things that happen at the scene of airplane accidents. And that's called Don't Wear Leggings on an Airplane, and other lessons from unhappy landings. That I think is hopefully going to be kind of funny and interesting and attract the general readership.
And when can we expect to be able to read these books?
Well, there's a good question. I'm looking for a publisher for Unmasking Boeing. So at this point, there's that hurdle to overcome. But once somebody decides to pay me to write that book, it will probably be another 2 years before it comes out. So, writing a book is not like television, Saida. Trust me, you chose to stay in the right business. Learn it today, broadcast it today.
Right. Well, I'm hoping to do a few, so we'll talk after all of this.
Oh yeah, well, plan a long schedule.
Yes. Christine, and full disclosure, Christine and I worked together many, many years ago. And you had started out as a very bright and promising local news reporter in
What
television.
happened to you?
So what happened to you was great, actually, wonderful things. But how did you segue from? I remember that you left Hartford to go to Chicago, and then it was network. Take us from your network career into becoming a safety specialist in aviation.
Yeah, okay, well, I will, because it's kind of an interesting thing. You know, everyone, I know, Saida, you're going to agree with me. Everyone in television has a weird path into it and sometimes out of it. But I was working at CNN at the time of the crash of TWA Flight 800. And before that time, I'd only covered a small airplane crash, you know, private airplane crash. I'd never covered an air disaster before, but that TWA 800 was a big one, and we were there for a long time. And I wound up working on that particular story for more than a year and was so intrigued by it. I think in another life I should have been an engineer, because I love the way there's so many different inputs and you have to structure them, you know, which leads to which leads to which. And if you do this, how do you do that? And what's the consequence of that? That all of that kind of mental gamesmanship really struck me as fascinating. And so when I uh, decided to write the book, and I wrote the book and finished writing the book about 2000, I said, you know, this is pretty interesting. And CNN was great. I mean, they let me do all the aviation stories. They just launched me into it from nowhere. And so then shortly after that, 9/11 happened. And I was contacted by an attorney, an aviation attorney in New York, who had read my book and knew about it. And he wanted to know if I wanted to come and help the law firm do the investigations into the 9/11, to the aviation sides of 9/11. But it also involves doing some work in terror financing. So I did. So I left television and I went to work for this law firm, Kreindler and Kreindler. And I learned everything on, you know, sort of on the job. I learned about accident investigations, and without having access to the direct evidence in some cases, I had to use public records and experts and all of that. But that's where I learned aviation accident investigations and safety. And I wound up joining the International Society of Air Safety Investigators, which is another rich font of information. And then I was at Kreindler and Kreindler until right around 2008, and I went back into journalism. So I wrote about aviation and aviation safety for the New York Times mostly, but also for industry publications, and became an expert I worked for NBC for a while, I worked for ABC for a while, and then at the time when I was working for ABC, they sent me off to Malaysia, and then that led to the next book, and there you go. So that's kind of a, you know, sort of a step by step of how I got here. So in fact, what I do now, and you know, and did with ABC and NBC, is take what I know about broadcasting, take what I know about aviation, take what I know about writing, and throw it all together and have this opportunity to offer kind of a knowledgeable look at a news event that is of interest really to the general public. So I guess in some ways I'm a translator of the complicated to the understandable, and the, you know, sort of the storytelling side of it.
Well, Christine, I hope you keep on doing this for a long, long time, because you are really doing the public a service, a great service, by doing the kind of investigation that you don't hear about and perhaps isn't even being done to the extent that it should.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. I'm not the only one out there doing it, but I do think that having I think what I bring to the table that you don't normally see with aviation safety specialists is the outsider view. I did not come up in an industry in which it was like, well, that's not the way we do it. I came from a journalist, which you as a journalist recognize that every question actually demands the next question, which is why or why not. And so I do have the ability to do that, and that's what I bring to the game. And some people have pissed people off, I have to say it, but other people recognize, well, you know, maybe an outsider's view is a good thing. And I vote with the second group.
And you do a lot of public speaking. Is that correct, Christine?
I do. I do. I mean, you know, there's the broadcasting, and then sometimes people want to have me talk about my book. And when a book comes out, obviously if you want to tip about writing a book, it is, Saida, you got to get out there and tell people about it, because books don't walk to your door. You got to get out and pitch them. So I do a lot of public speaking about my book. And then I think that there's an opportunity to talk. I do, and I think there's an opportunity to bring more women into the field of aviation, because it has been largely a male-dominated profession, and I don't think that benefits the industry. It kind of, we all think alike. So I like to see, and I do work with organizations about, that try and bring women into aviation, and Girls in Aviation Day and things like that. So there's reasons why I'm out there running my mouth, in addition to the fact that I like to run my mouth.
Well, you speak very well, Christine. Now, if people would like to get a hold of you, give us some information, contact information.
Oh, well, I'm very easy to find. I'm at www.christinenegroni.com. That's my website, which links you to everything else. My Facebook page for aviation safety called Flying Lessons, my travel blog, Go How Know How, which also has a Facebook page. And, whenever I write an article that I think is of interest, which I guess they all are, I wouldn't be writing them. I put them up on LinkedIn. So I'm easy to find.
All right. And your books are on Amazon?
And my books are on Amazon. The Crash Detectives is available in 5 languages. You can get it in Chinese. I don't have no idea whether the translation is good or not, but there it is. It's in Czech. It's in a bunch of languages I don't speak. Not in Spanish, which I wish it was. Saida, I wish you could use your pull and get that book translated into Spanish.
Well, we'll talk about that. We'll see. Thank you so much, Christine, for all that you do and for taking the time out of your very busy day to be on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for what you're doing, because I think it's a lot of fun. I've watched a few of your programs. It's a lot of fun to see what people I didn't know about were doing. So thank you for that.
Yes. And thank you for joining us for this edition of American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan.
From my perspective as a journalist, is how very much air accident investigations and journalism are the same.